Buttons, buttons, buttons. I love Gotas buttons. I use buttons instead of checkboxes, I use buttons instead of select lists, I would use buttons instead of text inputs if I could. Buttons is perhaps my most favorite feature of Gotas. It's what makes Gotas programmable and allows building docs that really feel like apps. I mean, Notion, Airtable, Monday all have buttons, but Gotas buttons put them all to shame. I mean, what is this? That is all you can do, yeah? Oh boy. Let me show you how it's done. And that, folks, is why I'm starting my epic super dive series with buttons. Let's go. Heads up, this video was filmed in January 2024, so if you're watching this in 2034, some things might have changed already, so check the description. If anything changes, I'll let you know in there. And I'm gonna speed up now because we have a lot to cover, so buckle up. A button is an interactive building block. Its main purpose is to be pushed, and you can configure what should happen when it is pushed. A button can be pushed by an automation, including webhook automation, so technically by any other app. Another button, through the Gotas API, but as of today only buttons in a table. But most commonly, of course, a button will be pushed by a user. Why do you want to use buttons? First, this is a way to make multiple changes in a single click. It can be something simple like resetting the status of all tasks, as well as something more complicated like a button that marks the last task done, sends a notification, and also moves the project to the next stage. Of course, users of the doc can just go and make all the changes in multiple places themselves, but when it's configured in a button, we don't have to worry that they forget a step. Second, this is also a way to configure custom behavior. Like in this doc, the button that I'm using instead of a checkbox moves the task from to do to done, but when unchecked, it doesn't move it back to do, it moves it to reopened. Besides, this button also tracks every click into a log table. While we could also do it with an automation, when we already have a button, there's no reason not to add the logic there. Reason number 3 is having greater control over what users can and cannot do. Like that same checkbox button, for example. It's only active for the person assigned to the task and their supervisor. But other people on the team cannot mark the task done. Of course, if people are determined enough, they will always find a way to hack into your doc despite all the locking. Yet it's good enough to prevent accidental changes, and for bad actors, it's still an obstacle. Which gently gets us to our point 4, buttons guide the user and help them understand what they are supposed to do. That's because buttons are familiar and ubiquitous. A person might see Gotas for the first time and be scared to interact with raw data, but when they see a button, they will be able to click it with less anxiety, knowing that somebody configured it for them. Reason number 5 to use buttons is to make external actions in other docs or services through Gotas packs, like send an email or add a calendar event. You cannot trigger such actions from a canvas or a column formula. You can only perform them from a button or an automation. Reason number 6 is buttons are sometimes faster and more convenient to interact with your data. Like I often use these switch buttons that cycle through options in a select list. Picking a value from the select list requires 2 clicks and moving your mouse in between, but with the cycling button you can just press it once or twice. And last but not least, reason number 7 is that when you get pro and your dogs grow big, you will use buttons to fix your performance. I'm calling this technique stamping, and I'm already making a video on it which is scheduled to come out the next week. Now you just let me get started on all the theory about formulas and buttons, and this video will get yet another half an hour longer. So I'm keeping that for a dedicated episode. For now, all you need to know is that formulas and buttons are basically the yin and yang of calculations in Gotas, and you cannot use it to its full potential without buttons. Next, where a button can be added. The 2 most common places are in a table as a button column and in a page which is outside of any table. There is also the third option, and no, it's not the hidden button formula. That one also deserves a separate video. The third option is very tricky and is not for the weak of the heart, so we'll talk about it in the end. The functional differences between page and table buttons are minimal. They both can use the same set of actions and access the same objects in the doc. The biggest difference is that table buttons additionally can reference this table and this row, and page buttons can't, because obviously they are not in a table and not in a row. Because of this, row buttons are logically best suited to performing an action that's relevant to that specific row, like notify on this task, while page buttons are meant to make actions that affect multiple rows or even whole views and tables, like notify on all tasks in this view. But of course, there are times when you want to have it otherwise, and that is also what you'll see me doing in some of my future lessons. Now, how do you add a button? In a page, you add them with a slash command. Type slash, then but, and you will already clearly see a selection of buttons in there. In a table, you can add them through the new column menu, or you can change the type of an existing column. For completion's sake, you can also insert buttons through the Insert panel. You go to Insert, Building Blocks, Buttons, and drag them from there either into your page or into a table. But it's slower and you don't want that panel to hang around and waste your screen estate, so I really recommend you to get used to that other way. Finally, what can buttons do? First and the most powerful is that they can edit your data, which you have in your tables. You can add, duplicate, edit and delete rows. Note that you cannot add, modify or delete columns because they are a part of the table structure and not data records. Also, at the moment you cannot edit page content because in Coda, pages are not for data. They are more for instructions about data and all sorts of input controls, whereas for the data itself, you are expected to put it in tables and tables only. There's also a video on that in the queue. However, maybe when you're watching this, it is already possible, so check the description to see if I left you a note. The next group of actions, well, you cannot edit page content, but you can change the value of page controls. You can set and reset your inputs, toggles, selects, sliders, and date pickers. Now there are also actions to duplicate a page. This can be useful when you have some template page that you want to copy. For example, you want to give each member of your team their own space to set up their views. There are also actions that trigger a copy doc dialog or a copy page to doc dialog. The fourth group is about navigation. There are two actions and both have some secrets to them. They can be used to build navigation within your dock, and I'll definitely make you an episode on that. Next, there is an action to send user a native Coda notification, which will be displayed in the top, arrive in the mobile Coda app, or come to you by email. Next is a group of refresh actions. You can have your button start a sync on a sync table, refresh a pack column like get new weather reports, or refresh the output of the Coda AI assistant. And finally, there are miscellaneous actions like you can copy content to clipboard, configure your button to push other buttons, or summon up the dialog to sign up the person to Coda. The last one is useful if you're in the referral revenue program. This way you can earn on the signups you bring, and with this action you can control at which perfect moment to suggest the user to sign up. Needless to say that any input to any of these actions can be a formula. So when you modify your task, for example, the status value that you set doesn't have to be some pre-selected value. It can be calculated at the moment of the click. Now, these are just the local actions which are taken immediately within your dock. These already let you do more than any of the competitor tools, and Coda keeps adding more. Then there is another whole world of pack actions. The majority of these packs connect Coda to a myriad of third-party services. And whenever you can do something in those services, like update a Jira ticket or insert data into Airtable or cancel an invoice in Stripe, this is also done with buttons. Most of these packs have lists of actions of their own, and these are not just packs from Coda. They're also custom packs by other makers, and even you can create one. And again, eventually I'll teach you that. Now, how do you configure a button with these actions? There are two ways. First is a simple mode, which is when you configure it through the user interface. You would think it's beginner friendly, but it's not. It's very slow and limited. To set up your action, you have to do a lot of clicking and clacking, and even then you can only configure one action per button, and if you want to make multiple actions, you have to create separate buttons and then create yet another button to push those buttons. And then you have to hide those buttons somewhere so that people don't find them and don't accidentally click them. And they still clutter up your doc namespace and show up in formula suggestions, which is a sure way that somebody will accidentally trigger it eventually. See, even if you're a beginner, getting used to this method is just not worth it. So don't listen to Coda, don't listen to other experts. Use the other way, which is to always configure your buttons with formulas. Under the hood, buttons use the same formula language, or actually an extension of it, called the Actions Framework. It is used not only in buttons but also automations, and there's quite a lot to cover, so to keep this video focused and also shorter, I'll make a separate episode on all about the Actions Framework and link it here. The most important point here is that when you're switching from the UI to formulas, you're taking a leap from this to this. This unlocks you the full potential of the Actions Framework. You can program complex actions with multiple steps, conditional steps, loops, all in a single button. Now listen to your good pal Paul. Don't get intimidated by this. Your formulas don't have to be like that immediately. You can start simple and instead of this, make it a formula. Using Coda without formulas is like using a typewriter in the computer age, so I strongly encourage you to build up the habit of using formulas, even for single-step actions. Soon you will see how far you'll progress and get much more comfortable with Coda in general. And me with my videos will be your guardian angel on this journey. Now, how to reference buttons so that you can push them from other buttons. Buttons in a page have object IDs. These IDs are unique, and when you want to push this button from another button, you reference it by its ID. These IDs are assigned by default, like button 1, button 2, or you can change them yourself in the button settings. I like to give them sensible names and prefix their IDs with btn so that I can find them more easily in the formula editor. Buttons and tables don't have IDs, but instead they're referenced by their column names. When you want to push a button from another button in the same row, you can call it like this row.column name. If you're pushing a button on a specific row from elsewhere in the doc, you can @reference the row and then get to its button. And of course, if you have relations, you can also follow a reference trail and push buttons in linked rows. You can reference the whole column of buttons by using table name.column name, or the whole column of buttons in a view by using respectively a view name.column name. This will push those buttons one by one and skip over the buttons that are disabled. So if you only want to push buttons on some rows, let's say you only notify people about overdue tasks, you can disable all the other buttons and push the whole column. Or you can just filter down the table and push the buttons only from the rows that match the filter. We didn't even want to disable that button, because what if we want to notify a user on a task that's not overdue? But make two buttons now, it's stupid. Why do that if we can just filter what to click? And this is again something that you can only do in the formula mode, not in the UI mode. The latter only lets you click the whole column. Alright, we covered the functionality, let's talk about styling. Buttons are rectangular with slightly rounded corners. You might have seen these buttons in the past and wonder, how do you make them? You can't. They used to be like that between 2020 and 2022, Coda made them round at some point, but eventually reverted them back to rectangular. There are a few things you can configure about your buttons. Some are dynamic and can be configured with formulas, and the other are not. Let's start with the options that are not dynamic. First is the button's color. You can pick out of the 9 options, you don't have custom colors. When you pick a color for a button in a table, it's going to be the same color for all rows. Same with the icon. You pick one icon, it applies to the whole column. Sadly, you cannot use custom icons, but you have a large selection of icons from the Icons 8 library. They are totally the same collection as the icons you have for docs and pages, but in a black and white variant. Also, you can select one of the 3 sizes, small, medium or large, but only for page buttons. You don't have this option for table buttons. They are always small, and while I get the reason to keep it compact in the table mode, this also means that you cannot make them larger in the detail mode, which is a shame. Also, in the advanced settings you have the alert behavior setting. It controls this pop-up that tells you what happened when you click the button. Now, what I usually do with this is when the result of a button click is immediately visible, like it changes something directly in my view, I set this setting to errors only. I don't need the pop-up, I already see that something happened. I only want to be alerted if something failed. However, if a button does something behind the scenes, like sends an email or changes something in a table on another page, I keep the setting to show alerts every time. I also keep it when I build docs for less experienced users, like the ones who wouldn't know about the Ctrl-Z shortcut. After all, this pop-up shows an undo button. So yes, the color, the icon and the size cannot be configured dynamically with a formula and cannot be different for different rows in a table. However, to the rescue comes the label. Now the label can be configured with a formula, and not just that, it can be rich text, which means you can put a whole lot of stuff in your button's label, like color text, a heading size text, a bullet list, or even an image. So you cannot have differently colored buttons, but you can reference differently colored text. You cannot change icons with the formula, but you can remove the icon altogether and use emoji. You can even use the content of a canvas cell. That's right, you can have a whole mini dashboard in your button. No tables or charts or interactive elements, of course, but you can have columns, callouts, and also charts if you get them as images. Not sure why you would do that, but if you want, you totally can. In tables, I usually do the opposite and remove the label altogether. Yes, you can do that too. This saves us a lot of space, and the icon and the column title are oftentimes enough to understand what the button does. Another essential part that you can configure with the formula is a button's disabled state. In tables, you can also configure it with the UI, but we already agreed you shouldn't. The expression you write in this formula should return the logical true or false. When it's true, the button will be disabled. When blank or false, it won't. And you should avoid returning non-logical values because your button may get broken or not disabled at all. The last piece that you can dynamically set is a badge. Contrary to what this says, the badge doesn't have to be a number. It can be text, but only a very short one. As you can see, this fits and this already doesn't. And it only supports plain text, not formatted text, meaning that you cannot set a colored text or an image there. But you can draw an emoji, like I've seen people using these colorful emojis as indicators. There are a few button gotchas that you need to keep in mind. First thing to know is that when you have a button running multiple actions and one of these actions fail, you get an error at that step and the rest of the steps won't run. But the actions that have already run don't revert either. This is especially painful when you're sending out emails and then one person has an invalid address, but all the previous emails already went out. While there is no way to avoid this, there is a way to be smarter about how you set these up so that you can test and rerun each action individually, and without all those problems that I listed about having too many buttons. In a nutshell, I put them on separate helper tables, which I then approach in a special way. I wish I could tell you already, but that's going to be a dedicated pro tip episode waiting to happen. The next gotcha is that when you click a button and it does a long-running action, it shows the spinning wheel and becomes disabled. However, it's only disabled in this tab. If someone else or you in another tab have this dock open, they can totally click this button while it's still running, resulting in the action being performed twice with unexpected effects. And not just that, if you click a button and it still runs, but then you move to another page and back to your page, the button will appear active again, even though it's still performing its thing. That's why if you have a long-running action, it's always a good idea to set it up so that it gets disabled when it starts running and re-enabled again when the action is complete. This too I'll cover in that pro tip episode. Another thing you can and should do with these long-running actions is, instead of that indefinite spinner, give a user a sense of progress. It can be as simple as showing just a progress number in the buttons label, or something cool like this makeshift progress bar, and that is also gonna be a separate episode. Or in the meantime, feel free to check out the guide by my student and longtime patron Pushu. She wrote how to do it, the link is in the description. The next and obvious thing happens when you click a button from an automation, like these notify buttons you try to click on a schedule every morning. When your buttons rely on such formulas as now, today or user, they may not work as you expect. The values of now and today can actually be in the past, and actions that rely on the current user will not work at all. This is more of a quirk with automations than buttons, but I felt like this was worth to include it here as well. But yes, I'll talk about it in a greater detail in an episode about automations. Another curious thing is, while indeed a button cannot reference itself, it can totally push itself indirectly. When it's a button in a page, it can click another button, which will click this button. And when it's a button in a table, you don't even need the second button. Contrary to what Gotas says, you can reference a button in the same column if you do it through the reference to the same row. This trick is very useful when you need to make an action that keeps repeating itself until a condition is met, and you don't know how many iterations it will take. You set that condition as a part of your formula or as a disable if expression. And if you forget to do that, the action will just loop indefinitely until it fails with an error, or you reload the tab. Now, the last thing to know is that Gotas lets you group a table on the buttons column. However, at the moment this functionality is broken. Candidly, it never really worked reliably, but today even less so. Like, your grouped button can be disabled just because you use the glorious chain style, but get enabled when you move to the peasant nested style. So I suggest you this: let's pretend I haven't told you this trick. I wrote to Gotas, I hope they fix it, and when they do, I'll record you a follow-up episode. Okay, if you're not a super experienced Gotas user, this is where you should stop. This is what you should know and use. However, I promised you to tell about the third place where we can add a button. And it's in the canvas column in a table. Now, why is this special? Well, canvas columns are themselves special. Contrary to how it appears, they are actually not a part of your data, they exist outside of tables. The best way to think about your canvas pages is that they are technically the same as your top level pages. They share the same fabric of a canvas. I know it's confusing, we'll talk more about this on an episode about canvases. What is important to our case is that when you initialize a canvas in a tables row, this is identical to creating a new top level page. It just doesn't show up there. And when you put a button there, this is identical to creating a top level page button. And this button will have all the properties of a regular page button. But also, since Gotas made these canvas cells integrate with the rows they are in, you're also getting a reference to this row, which means you can configure these buttons to take the same kind of actions as your normal table buttons. Which to you now may look like the best of the two worlds. With these buttons, you can change their size, you can have different colors in different rows, and even configure their actions individually. You can also have multiple buttons in the same column. This can be useful for displaying multiple buttons side to side on a card, for example. And if that's not enough, these canvases are something that you can reference in formulas, and they actually retain buttons in them. So you can mix and match them with a formula dynamically and show a different set of buttons on a different card. There is a whole lot of tricks that you can do with canvases, and you will be seeing more of them on my future episodes. But that's what they are, the tricks. Unfortunately, that's where the benefits end and problems problems start. Remember I said that whenever you initialize a single canvas cell, that's like creating a page, and the button in that cell is like a top page button. Well, if you're going to create these canvases for each row, that's how many pages you'll be creating. And if you plan to have buttons in each of them, that's how many top-level buttons you will have. And your doc namespace looking like this would be half the problem. Remember that all those buttons are individual buttons. You want to update the formula. Tough luck, you have to update the formula on each of them individually or regenerate them all again. Now, like any trick, this can be used responsibly and be a perfectly valid solution. And it does open up many cool scenarios which I plan to cover on my future episodes. So you do have my permission to use it, but only if you know what you're doing and what the implications are. Besides, there's something even better, the moment you've been waiting for, the infamous hidden button formula. Now that one lets you create a button with a formula, and you can have a dynamic color, a dynamic icon, a larger size, and you can show multiple buttons in the same field and concatenate them wherever you want, all without the problems that canvas cell buttons have. But I won't cover that in this video because first, it's a hidden formula and you shouldn't use that, well, unless you've got a training from me. And second, because this video is already jam-packed with information and I cannot make you sit through another hour of me talking about the hidden formula. You guessed it, it will be a separate episode as well. Whew, that's been something. But such is the topic, coda buttons are really a beast. I hope I covered everything. If I didn't, please let me know in the comments. Also let me know if you liked it and if you learned something new. And tell me if you like the format in general. This is super hard to compile together, but at the same time there is no way you're getting all that information in a single place from anywhere else. Literally, it's all either scattered over community, docs, videos, or they are all in here. And I already have other super deep dives planned, like on the display column, on tables and views, on forms, publishing, lots of topics really. And don't worry, none as long as this one. Also, let's count how many follow-up videos I already promised to record. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 10 more videos. That's a lot of work, but I want to do this. And I'll only be able to do this if I have your support. I took a leap of faith and cancelled on all my clients so that I could record these for you. But I don't have much runway. When it ends, I'll have to get back to client work and I won't have time or energy to keep recording these, meaning that we all lose. So please check out my Patreon and consider supporting me with a monthly tip. If each of you subscribed for $10 or $5 or at least $2 per month, I wouldn't have to worry about having to stop making these. There is no lock-in, you can downgrade or cancel anytime. If you just intend to pay once, you can subscribe and unsubscribe immediately. Besides, each tip comes with a reward. For example, if you pledge to the $10 tier, you get access to most of the docs I showcased in this video, and if you subscribe for a year upfront by the end of February, you're getting all of the docs that were featured in this video. Yes, even the duplicate finder, which is itself a $100 value. Alright, this concludes my initial batch of videos. I hope you got properly mind blown and hungry for more. So again, please like, subscribe, consider becoming a patron, and I see you in the next one, which is coming out this Thursday already.